He left me humiliated and stripped of everything at our engagement. 6 months later, I walked into his biggest public event with every piece of evidence to destroy him. Minutes before he could finish his speech, the truth hit the headlines. By the time he saw me, it was too late. I'd taken everything, and left him in the ruins. The clink of champagne glasses, the hum of string instruments, and the glittering light from 100 crystal chandeliers. That was supposed to be the soundtrack of the happiest night of my life. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, smiling until my cheeks ached, every movement rehearsed. The satin of my gown brushed against the polished marble as I moved from one group of guests to the next, thanking them for coming to celebrate my engagement to Marcus Duval. Marcus. Tall, charismatic, impeccably dressed. The man I'd believed would stand beside me for the rest of my life. He was nowhere to be seen. I scanned the room for him, ignoring the slight pinch in my chest. Probably speaking to the investors, I told myself. That was Marcus's thing. He always worked the room like a predator in a custom suit, zeroing in on the most powerful person in any gathering. My mother appeared at my side, her hand light on my arm. "Your fiancé is being charming again," she said with a knowing smile. I saw him slip out to the terrace, probably sealing a deal over cigars. That should have reassured me. It didn't. I slipped away from the main hall, weaving through the crowd toward the glass doors that led to the terrace and the gardens beyond. The night air was a welcome relief from the ballroom's heat, carrying the faint scent of roses from the landscaped hedges. Then I heard it. A laugh, soft, feminine, familiar. I froze just before the curve of the hedge, recognizing the voice instantly. Ivy. My cousin Ivy Holt had been raised like a little sister to me. We'd grown up together, shared childhood secrets, swapped dresses before galas. She'd been one of my bridesmaids. I took another step and my world tilted. Marcus was there, his arm around her waist, his head bent close enough that his lips brushed her ear. Ivy leaned into him, fingers curled in his lapel, looking up at him with the kind of gaze I'd once thought was reserved for me. "Soon enough it'll all be ours," Marcus murmured, his voice low but carrying in the still air. Ivy giggled. "And Serena? She really doesn't suspect." He smirked. "She's in love. And naive. By the time she realizes, the Holt shipping contracts will be signed over and she'll be yesterday's news." I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was standing right there, my heels crunching against the gravel path. Yesterday's news? My voice was ice. They both jerked like they'd been caught stealing. Ivy's face flushed, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Marcus recovered faster. He straightened, adjusted his cufflinks and smiled, that smooth, infuriating smile he used when he thought charm could erase anything. "Serena," he said lightly, "you weren't supposed to hear that." "No." I took a step forward. "Then maybe you should explain why my fiancé is holding my cousin like he's auditioning for her wedding pictures." Ivy flinched. "It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I snapped. Marcus didn't even try to deny it. He glanced at Ivy, then back at me, his tone maddeningly calm. "Serena, you've always known this was more than just about us. Your family's shipping empire is the jewel of this city. I'm making sure it lands in the right hands." I stared at him, my nails digging into my palms. "And the right hands are yours?" A slow smirk. "And Ivy's. We're getting married." The words hit like a physical blow. I laughed. Sharp, bitter, disbelieving. "You're announcing this now? On my engagement night?" He didn't blink. "Why not? Everyone who matters is here. The sooner we make it official, the sooner the investors will align." For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of music from the ballroom. Then Ivy's hand slid into his and she actually looked at me with pity. "I'm sorry, Serena," she said softly, "but you're not really cut out for the kind of partnership Marcus needs." It was instinct, not thought, that made my hand move. The slap echoed in the night air, leaving a red mark blooming across her cheek. Her gasp was drowned out by the sound of my father's voice calling my name from the open terrace doors. I turned and my heart dropped. He stood there, pale, his hand pressed to his chest. My mother was at his side, eyes wide with fear. "Dad." He swayed, and before I could reach him, his knees buckled. The next moments were a blur. The rush of guests, someone shouting for an ambulance, my mother's tearful voice telling me to stay with him. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, Marcus stood on the terrace, one arm still around Ivy, watching like a man at a show that didn't concern him. The engagement party dissolved into chaos. I didn't speak to Marcus again that night. I didn't even go back into the ballroom to collect my things. Instead, I followed the ambulance to the hospital, still in my gown, the fabric pooling around me in the backseat of my car. The nurse in the emergency room barely spared a glance at the glittering diamond still on my finger. Hours later, when my father was stable but unconscious, I sat in the dim glow of the hospital room, staring at the silent monitors. I replayed Marcus's words over and over. He's in love. And naive. Maybe I had been naive. But something in me had shifted tonight. I'd seen the way Marcus looked at me when I walked into that garden. Not with fear of losing me, not with regret. With calculation. And I understood something with sudden, perfect clarity. I had been nothing more than a means to an end. But he'd made one mistake. He'd shown me the endgame before the final move. No. I would make sure Marcus Duval lost far more than I ever did. The morning after the engagement party that wasn't. The newspapers didn't even bother to pretend it had been a misunderstanding. Bayview's power couple switch up. Marcus Duval and Ivy Holt announce surprise engagement. Holt heiress leaves party early after family medical emergency. They were kind enough not to print the photos of my father being loaded into the ambulance. But they had no problem running glossy shots of Marcus and Ivy from later that night. Him in his tailored suit, her in the ice blue gown she'd worn as my bridesmaid, both smiling like royalty. In one shot, Ivy's hand rested on Marcus's chest, her engagement ring catching the light. The caption called it a diamond fit for Bayview's newest queen. By the end of that week, Holt shipping stock had dropped 9%. Rumors, my mother said grimly over the breakfast table, her voice tight. Marcus is spreading them through his little network. Saying your father's too ill to run the company. That the board's already looking for a buyer. I stared into my untouched coffee. He's trying to drive the price down. She didn't answer, but the grim set of her mouth was confirmation enough. The press didn't leave me alone either. They swarmed outside the hospital when I visited my father, peppering me with questions about Marcus, about Ivy, about whether the Holts were facing bankruptcy. At first I kept my head down, answering nothing. But that didn't stop them from filling the silence with their own stories. Serena Holt too humiliated to comment. Sources say Holt heiress was difficult and controlling during engagement. Marcus Duval finds happiness with Ivy Holt after painful split. Ivy of course fed them quotes. I've always admired Marcus, she cooed in one glossy magazine interview. We didn't plan to fall in love, but sometimes life surprises you. I just hope Serena finds her own happiness one day. There was a picture of her leaning against Marcus's shoulder, her eyes wide and innocent for the camera. If I didn't know her better, I might have believed her. By mid-month, Holt Shipping was in trouble. Board members were restless. Creditors were calling daily. A few long-standing clients quietly withdrew their contracts, citing uncertainty in leadership. I spent most of my days at the hospital, reading reports in my father's room while machines beeped softly beside his bed. He hated hospitals, hated being seen as weak. Even unconscious, I swear he knew the company was faltering. I held his hand one afternoon, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Don't worry, Dad. I'll handle it. The words felt brave in the moment. But the truth? I had no idea where to start. The first real crack in my self-control came 2 weeks after the party. I'd been invited, reluctantly, to a gala for the Bayview Art Foundation. The invitation had been sent before the scandal and I almost didn't go. But my mother insisted. We can't hide, she said, adjusting the clasp of the sapphire necklace at my throat. If you disappear now, you'll look weak. Let them see you can stand in the same room as them. I didn't point out that them meant Marcus and Ivy. The ballroom was a glittering ocean of silk gowns and champagne flutes. The air was thick with polite conversation, the kind that always hummed just above a whisper until someone said something scandalous. I saw Marcus almost immediately, tall, polished, laughing easily among a circle of men near the bar. Ivy was across the room, holding court with a group of women who were all leaning in to admire her ring. I kept my distance, making polite conversation with a shipping executive I barely knew, until I caught a fragment of Marcus's voice. Once the contracts are in place, Holt Shipping will be ours for pennies. They'll thank us for taking it off their hands. My head snapped up. I took a slow step closer, careful to stay out of sight behind a marble column. You think she'll fight you on it? One of the men asked. Marcus chuckled. Serena? She couldn't fight her way out of a board meeting without her father. She's finished. All we have to do is let her think she's still in the game until it's too late. The group laughed, not cruelly, just casually, like it was obvious. Like I was already irrelevant. And then Ivy's voice floated over, low and amused. She still has some pride. We should crush it before the takeover so she won't make trouble later. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Until then I'd been surviving, keeping my head down, focusing on my father's recovery, trying to limit the damage. But hearing them speak so openly, so confidently about dismantling everything my family had built, I realized that surviving wasn't enough. I wasn't going to defend myself quietly. I wasn't going to hope the truth would come out on its own. If Marcus wanted to take Holt shipping for pennies, I'd make sure he paid in blood. If Ivy wanted to crush my pride, I'd show her what it felt like to be stripped of everything in front of the same people she tried to impress. I left the gala without speaking to either of them. But in the back of the car I pulled out my phone and began making a list. Names, companies, connections. Every asset Marcus had, every ally he relied on. Because if he thought I was naive before, he was about to meet the version of me he never saw coming. The invitation arrived in a thick ivory envelope, the kind only certain circles used. The ones that smelled faintly of old money and quiet power. Bayview International Business Forum. Private networking evening. Under normal circumstances I wouldn't have gone. After the disaster of the engagement party and the weeks of humiliation that followed, I'd avoided large gatherings like the plague. Every event was a minefield of thinly veiled pity and sharper whispers. But this wasn't a charity gala or a social function. This was where deals were made, alliances formed, enemies disarmed. And if I was going to dismantle Marcus Duval, I needed to start here. The hotel ballroom was a different kind of glittering tonight. Softer lighting, fewer gowns, more tailored suits. Waiters glided through the crowd with trays of champagne and truffle canapés. Conversations were quieter here but more dangerous. I moved through the room slowly, deliberately, keeping my posture poised and my expression neutral. I wasn't here to mingle. I was here to listen. I was standing near the art installation in the center of the room, a modern sculpture that looked like shards of glass frozen mid-explosion, when I felt someone step beside me. You're Serena Holt. The voice was male, smooth, but with an edge that made it clear it wasn't a question. I turned. The man standing there was tall, dark-haired, his tailored black suit cut to perfection. His features were sharp, almost too symmetrical, and his eyes, gray, cool, assessing, studied me like I was a chess piece he was considering moving. And you are? I asked, matching his calm. Adrian Cross. The name landed with weight. Even I, who'd spent the last few years focused more on family shipping contracts than venture capital, knew who he was. Adrian Cross. The kind of investor who turned small companies into global powerhouses, or dismantled them if they crossed him. Ruthless. Precise. Uncompromising. Should I be flattered you know my name? I asked. His lips curved faintly. Flattered? Oh, cautious. Maybe. I raised a brow. And why is that? Because, he said, swirling the champagne in his glass without looking away from me, we have a mutual enemy. It took me all of 3 seconds to understand. Marcus. Adrian inclined his head slightly. 3 years ago we co-founded a tech logistics startup. Marcus decided he wanted the company without the partner. He engineered a board coup, locked me out, and sold it off, for twice the valuation, to a foreign buyer. Kept every cent for himself. My fingers tightened around my glass. That sounds familiar. His gaze sharpened. I've been waiting for the right time to gut him. Then you fell into my lap. I bristled at the phrasing. I didn't fall anywhere. He gave me a look that was more amusement than apology. You know what I mean. You have access, insight, and a very public reason to want him ruined. I have the resources and the reach. Together we could make this efficient. It was tempting. Too tempting. But I'd learned not to trust charming men with sharp smiles. What's in it for you besides revenge? I asked. Adrian's smile didn't waver. The company Marcus stole is now a critical part of his supply chain. We destabilize him, I get it back. You get your family's power restored. We both win. I sipped my champagne, weighing him. Everything about Adrian screamed danger, the kind you couldn't quite see coming until it was too late. But he also screamed competence, and that was something I couldn't ignore. And what if I say no? He tilted his head slightly, the ghost of a smirk on his lips. Then I'll still ruin him. But you'll be watching from the sidelines while he takes your family's company apart piece by piece. The audacity was infuriating. And effective. I set my glass down on the nearest table. Fine. But I'm not your pawn. This is a partnership. Agreed. He extended a hand. I hesitated only a second before taking it. His grip was firm, his eyes never leaving mine. First step, Adrian said, releasing my hand. Marcus is courting a new investor from Dubai. Call it Al-Rashid. If that deal goes through, Marcus gets the liquidity he needs to accelerate the takeover of Holt Shipping. We make sure it doesn't happen. And how do you plan to do that? A slow smile spread across Adrian's face. Leave that to me. All I need from you is intel, dinner reservations, meetings, anyone in his circle who owes you a favor. I thought for a moment, then nodded. I know someone on his events team. She owes me. I'll get you the schedule. By the time I left the ballroom that night, my phone already had a new encrypted messaging app installed, courtesy of Adrian's assistant, and a shared file labeled Operation Glass Tower. It was the first time since the engagement night that I felt not safe but sharp, focused. Marcus thought I was finished, but I was just getting started. The first rule of revenge isn't patience. It's misdirection. If your enemy knows you're coming, they'll fortify. If they think you're licking your wounds somewhere quiet, they'll let their guard down. So I let Marcus believe I'd vanished. For 2 months, I stayed out of Bayview's social pages, skipped galas, and ignored half a dozen polite, "we'd love to see you" invitations from women who only wanted me there as gossip fodder. But behind the scenes, I was building something new. It started with a small logistics startup on the brink of bankruptcy, Fleetline. Its office was in a converted warehouse by the docks. Its website looked like it hadn't been updated since 2010, and its CEO was weeks away from shuttering the doors. But the bones were there. A skeletal infrastructure that could grow into something competitive with the right capital and strategy. And I had both. Through an investment group Adrian connected me with, one that kept my name off every document, I bought controlling interest. Then I tore it apart. The outdated software was replaced. Contracts were renegotiated. A new marketing team rebranded the company with a sleek identity, Fleetline Global. Within 6 weeks, we landed our first major contract with an East Coast manufacturing firm. Within 8 we had 2 more. Adrian visited the new office one afternoon, leaning against my desk with his usual air of casual amusement. "You're enjoying this," he observed. "I'm good at it," I corrected. He smiled faintly. "You're dangerous when you're good at something." I met his gaze. That's the point. The reinvention didn't stop at business. I let go of the soft, romantic image I'd worn for Marcus. Pastel dresses, gentle curls, an air of approachable warmth. That Serena was gone. In her place was someone sharper. Structured silhouettes, deep jewel tones, hair pulled back to show I didn't need softness to be striking. My makeup went from dewy to defined. People noticed. And they talked. The first time I stepped back into Bayview's social circuit, it was at the winter charity ball. The last time I'd been in that ballroom, I'd been engaged. Now I walked in alone, wearing a sapphire gown that fit like armor and caught the light with every step. I knew before I even saw him that Marcus was here. And I knew the exact moment he spotted me. The conversation at his table faltered. His eyes tracked me across the room, narrowing slightly, as if he was trying to fit the woman in front of him into the version of me he remembered. I didn't give him the chance. When he finally approached, drink in hand, I let him get within 3 feet before I smiled politely. "Marcus. Good evening." "Serena." His gaze flicked over me, assessing. "You've been busy. Some of us don't have the luxury of taking extended vacations," I said lightly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "I've been meaning to call you." "I've been meaning not to answer," I replied, then excused myself to greet someone else. By the 3rd event that month, the pattern was set. I'd arrive, we'd exchange clipped pleasantries, and I'd be gone before he could steer me into a private corner. The distance was deliberate. It made him restless. And restlessness makes men like Marcus reckless. Adrian noticed, of course. We were having dinner in his penthouse one evening, a habit we'd developed under the guise of strategy meetings, when he set down his wine glass and studied me. "You're baiting him." "Yes. Bait is supposed to stay still, Serena. You're moving too much. He'll get suspicious." I arched a brow. Suspicion is good. Makes him watch me. And when he's watching me, he's not watching where the real threat is coming from. Adrian's mouth curved in that faint, dangerous smile. "And where is it coming from?" I met his eyes. "You." He didn't deny it. 3 weeks later, I got the first real sign that Marcus was taking it personally. An invitation arrived. Dinner at one of Bayview's most exclusive rooftop restaurants, the kind with a months-long wait list. The note was handwritten. "We should talk." I stared at it for a long time before tucking it into my desk drawer and forgetting about it. The next night, another invitation arrived. This one was more formal. A business luncheon hosted by an industry association. He was on the speaker panel. I declined again. By the third attempt, a private art viewing at the Bayshore Gallery, I could almost hear the frustration in the courier's voice as he said, "Mr. Duval asked me to hand this to you personally." I took it with a smile. "Tell Mr. Duval I'm terribly busy." Each refusal was a thread and I could feel them tightening around him. Marcus was a man who needed control. And nothing made a man like that more dangerous, or more vulnerable, than realizing he didn't have it anymore. One evening, after I'd left yet another event before Marcus could corner me, Adrian called. "You've got him pacing," he said without preamble. "How do you know?" "Because one of my people saw him at the Harbor Club tonight. He left early. Alone. And looking like he'd bitten into something sour." I smiled to myself. "Good." Adrian's voice was quieter when he added, "Just remember, the longer you pull the string, the more satisfying it'll be when it unravels." "I'm counting on it," I said. By the end of the month, Fleetline Global had quietly secured 2 contracts that Marcus had been courting for himself. He didn't know yet that I was behind it. But he would. And when he did, I wanted to be standing right in front of him, smiling. Because this was only the middle game. The real play, the one that would strip him of everything, was still to come. There's a saying my father used to repeat when I was younger, back when boardroom lessons were slipped into casual conversations over breakfast. "You don't have to push a greedy man. Just give him a shiny cliff to walk toward." Marcus had always been greedy. It wasn't enough for him to win, he needed to win more, faster and louder than anyone else. And Adrian and I had just finished polishing the shiniest cliff of his career. It started with a name, Blue Wave Energy. In reality, it was nothing more than a registered shell company with an impressive-sounding portfolio and a handful of fabricated environmental tech patents. On paper, though, it looked like the next big disruptor in offshore renewable energy. Adrian's people seeded whispers about it into all the right ears. Investment newsletters, exclusive forums, even a staged leak to a trade journalist who was known for printing rumors without fact-checking. Within a week, Blue Wave was the phrase slipping out of expensive mouths in backrooms. Within 2, Marcus was circling. "He's asking questions," Adrian said over dinner one night, glancing at his phone. I was stirring my espresso. "Good. Make him think it's hard to get in." "Oh, he already thinks that. We've reluctantly allowed 2 investors, both ours, to take small stakes. He's salivating over being the third." I smiled. "And the buy-in?" $25 million minimum." I didn't even blink. "He'll go for more. He won't want to be outdone." The following week, I accidentally ran into one of Marcus's junior executives at a waterfront cafe, someone I'd made a point of being friendly with back when I was still wearing his ring. Over coffee, I let slip, carefully like I hadn't meant to, that I'd heard Blue Wave's entry point was closing soon. "Of course," I added with just enough hesitation to sound genuine, "Marcus is probably already in talks. He's always first to these things." The executive's eyes lit up like I'd just handed him a gift. "I'll make sure he knows." By the end of the month, Marcus had committed $32 million of his company's liquidity to Blue Wave. I knew because Adrian had a copy of the transfer confirmation on his desk within an hour of it happening. "Hook, line, and sinker," Adrian murmured, holding up the printout like a piece of art. I looked at the neat black numbers, feeling the faint electric satisfaction of the first real hit. "When does it collapse?" 2 weeks, he said simply. just long enough for him to tell his board it's the deal of the year. 2 weeks later, headlines started appearing. Blue Wave Energy Project halts operations. Regulatory issues cited. Investors face heavy losses in failed offshore venture. Marcus's name wasn't in the articles yet. But it didn't have to be. People in his world connected dots faster than journalists ever could. By the third day, his company's stock had dipped 12%. By the fifth, an emergency board meeting was called. I wasn't in the room, of course, but Adrian's sources painted the scene vividly enough for me to enjoy it from the comfort of Fleetline's sleek new conference table. Marcus trying to spin it as a temporary setback. The CFO questioning why due diligence reports had been bypassed. 2 board members openly wondering if this was the first time funds had been mismanaged. It was the first time Marcus had felt the ground shift under him in years. Ivy predictably didn't take it well. 2 nights after the news broke, I spotted her at a charity auction, her diamond earrings flashing under the lights as she sipped champagne like it might keep the panic down. She didn't see me, but I heard her. I told him we can't cut the travel budget, she was whispering to another socialite. What are we supposed to do, fly commercial? People will notice. Her friend murmured something back and Ivy's laugh was brittle. It's fine. Marcus will fix it. He always does. But Marcus couldn't fix this. Blue Wave's implosion had triggered a review of recent financial activity, and whispers of embezzlement were already floating around Bayview's private clubs. Every step had been intentional, every domino placed months ago. And Marcus had pushed the first one himself. The trap had closed. But it wasn't the end. No, this was only the first fracture. The heartbreak was still coming. When the media finally turned on Marcus, it was almost elegant. It started with a single investigative piece in Bayview Financial Weekly. A polite but devastating takedown, tracing the Blue Wave fiasco back to lapses in due diligence and a culture of impulsive leadership. They didn't outright call him corrupt, not yet. But the implication was there, hanging in every neatly phrased sentence. Then the bigger outlets picked it up. National business news stations replayed stock charts showing his company's value in freefall. Anchors with perfect hair and clipped voices speculated whether Marcus Duval's empire was a bubble finally bursting. Adrian and I watched one of these segments together in his penthouse. You see that? He said, gesturing toward the scrolling headlines at the bottom of the screen. I smiled faintly. They're doing half our work for us. And for free, he added, clearly enjoying himself. By the second week, the damage was bleeding into Marcus's day-to-day operations. 2 major shipping partners, ones he'd publicly boasted about securing, quietly pulled their contracts. A manufacturing firm in Singapore suspended talks on a joint venture. His own board called for a formal audit of all major expenditures in the last 18 months. I pictured him in that glass office of his, pacing, his jaw tight, wondering how much of this was coincidence and how much was design. If he suspected me, he couldn't prove it. Not yet. Ivy, however, wasn't built for quiet suffering. The first time I saw her crack was at the Langford Luncheon, a monthly charity event where Bayview's most influential women smiled at each other over tea and scones while making mental notes of who was falling out of favor. Ivy arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a dress I recognized from a season-old collection. That alone was enough to start whispers. By the time she reached the table, I could hear the murmurs. She's cutting back. Marcus must be in trouble. One of the women, a real estate heiress with a venomous smile, leaned forward and said, Ivy darling, I heard Marcus had to cancel his trip to St. Tropez this year. Such a shame. Ivy's laugh was too loud, too quick. Oh, we decided to focus on work this summer. You know, priorities. But when her phone buzzed, she glanced at it and her face tightened before she looked away. 2 days later, I heard from Adrian's sources that she'd had a very public argument with Marcus at a members-only club. Apparently, she'd accused him, loudly, of destroying their lifestyle and making her a laughingstock. I almost wished I could have been there to watch. It was around then that the invitation arrived for the Bayview Industry Excellence Awards Gala. Under other circumstances, I might have declined. It was a night dedicated to toasting the best and brightest in our city's business world, which meant Marcus was almost guaranteed to be there. But this year, Fleetline Global had been quietly nominated for Innovator in Logistics, thanks to a PR push Adrian had orchestrated. And that made it the perfect stage. The night of the gala, I walked into the glass-domed venue wearing a gown the color of molten gold. Not subtle, not soft. My hair was sleek, my heels sharp enough to double as weapons. The moment I stepped onto the red carpet, cameras turned. Questions flew. Serena, where have you been? What's next for you? Is it true you've taken over a logistics firm? I gave them just enough. A smile here, a comment there, before moving inside. The award came midway through the evening. The announcer's voice rang out over the glittering crowd. And this year's Innovator in Logistics Award goes to Fleetline Global, led by CEO Serena Holt. Applause rose as I walked to the stage, the golden light catching on the crystal award they handed me. I kept my acceptance speech brief, strategic. Fleetline is proof that resilience and vision can take you further than any shortcut. In our industry, integrity isn't optional. It's the foundation. There was a beat of silence before the applause started again. I didn't need to name Marcus for the message to hit. I felt him before I saw him. After the ceremony, as I stepped away from a cluster of executives congratulating me, Marcus appeared at my side. Resilience and vision? He said, his voice low. That's cute. I turned to face him, noting the slight shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Thank you. I'm glad you were listening. His smile was cold. Enjoy the spotlight while you can. We both know it doesn't last forever. I tilted my head. Neither do empires built on lies. A flicker, just a flicker, passed through his eyes before he smoothed it away. You think you're untouchable now? He asked. I stepped closer, just enough for my words to be for him alone, and for the group of onlookers behind him to see the way his expression shifted. I don't think it, Marcus. I know it. And so does everyone else in this room. Then I smiled, excused myself and walked away, leaving him standing there, still holding a drink he hadn't touched. Later I caught sight of him across the room watching me. Not with the smug ownership I remembered, but with something far more satisfying. The look of a man who realizes the ground he thought was solid is turning to sand beneath his feet. And I knew then that the power had shifted. For the first time since this started, he was chasing me. The thing about social climbers like Ivy is that they only cling to you while the view is good. When the ground starts to tilt, they're already looking for the next ledge to grab. I'd been waiting for her to reach that point. Came faster than I expected. The Bayview Art Auction was one of those events where appearances were everything. A place where women wore couture gowns they'd never sit down in and men pretended to know more about paintings than they did about their own portfolios. I wasn't attending, but Adrian's people were everywhere, and one of them caught the moment Ivy's mask slipped. Apparently she'd been cornered by two of her former friends. The kind who'd been all too happy to bask in her glow when Marcus's money was limitless. Oh darling, one of them purred. I heard Marcus has been preoccupied. Trouble at the company? Ivy's laugh was brittle. Preoccupied? Try obsessed. He's hemorrhaging money and ignoring me half the time. Honestly, I don't know why I stay. That little gem made its way to me within hours. 3 days later I got the text. From an unknown number. We need to talk. Just us. I'll make it worth your while. Ivy. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back. You have 10 minutes at the Bayshore Conservatory tomorrow. 2 p.m. Don't be late. The conservatory was quiet when I arrived the next afternoon, the winter light filtering through glass walls onto rows of orchids and winter blooms. I chose a bench near the back where the sound of the fountain drowned out everything else. At exactly 2:03, the sharp click of heels echoed through the space. Ivy appeared in a cream coat belted tightly at the waist, oversized sunglasses hiding most of her face. You're late, I said without looking up from my phone. She slid onto the bench beside me. Traffic. Try harder next time. We sat in silence for a moment, the faint scent of lilies hanging between us. Finally, she said, Marcus is going to ruin me. I looked up at her, letting a slow smile curl at the edge of my mouth. You mean like you tried to ruin me? She flinched just slightly. That was different. No, Ivy. That was you seeing an opportunity and taking it. You were betting on Marcus being the better horse. How's that working out for you? Her jaw tightened. I didn't come here for a lecture. I came here to make you an offer. I leaned back, crossing my legs. I'm listening. Her voice dropped. I know where Marcus keeps his real money. Offshore accounts. Shell companies. He's been laundering profits for years through deals no one's supposed to know about. I can give you names. Dates. Transaction details. I didn't move, didn't let the flicker of satisfaction show on my face. And why, I asked slowly, would you give me something like that? Because when he goes down, and he will, I don't want to go with him. I studied her, trying to decide if this was desperation or just another layer of calculation. You're expecting me to save you, I said finally. I'm expecting you to make sure my name isn't dragged through the mud when the headlines hit, she corrected. You get what you want, I get to keep what's left of my life. We both win. For a long moment, I let the sound of the fountain fill the space between us. Then I said, here's how this works. You give me something I can verify and I'll decide if you're worth protecting. But if you try to play me, I let the pause hang, leaning in just enough for my voice to drop to a whisper. I'll make sure you go down with him. Harder than he does. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't look away. You'll get your proof. Soon. She stood, pulling her coat tighter, and walked away without another word. I watched her go, already calculating the possibilities. Adrian was going to love this. That night, I forwarded the details of our meeting to him. His reply came back almost instantly. She's scared. That makes her useful. I typed back. For now. Because Ivy Holt might have just handed me the key to ending Marcus for good. Or she might have handed me a trap of her own. Either way, I intended to be the one holding the detonator when it went off. It took exactly 9 days to verify Ivy's intel. Adrian's forensic accountants went through it line by line, matching shell company registrations to transaction IDs, mapping offshore transfers across 3 countries, and pulling up ownership records Marcus had buried under layers of legal smokescreens. When the final report landed on my desk, it was thick enough to break a coffee table. Airtight, Adrian said, flipping through the binder. If this goes public, he's finished. Public isn't enough, I replied. I want him finished and humiliated. The perfect opportunity came in the form of the Global Maritime and Logistics Summit, a 3-day industry event drawing investors, regulators, and journalists from across the globe. Marcus was scheduled to give the keynote address on the final morning, which meant all eyes would be on him. We timed it to the minute. At 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before Marcus was due on stage, Adrian's media contacts received an encrypted file containing the full dossier, bank records, incorporation papers, internal emails, even photographs of Marcus meeting with known financial fixers. At the same time, the regulatory authorities received the same package, along with an anonymous tip that Marcus would be at the summit all day. The press moved faster than I expected. I arrived at the conference dressed in a tailored black suit, my badge clipped neatly to my lapel. I didn't need to be front row for this. I preferred a seat off to the side where I could watch the unraveling from a distance. The buzz started just after 10 o'clock. Phones lit up. People in the audience whispered, glancing toward the stage. A journalist in the 3rd row got up and left, phone pressed to her ear. And then Marcus walked out. He was wearing his usual uniform, navy suit, silver tie, but there was a tightness around his mouth, like he already knew the air had shifted. Good morning, he began, launching into a speech about innovation in global shipping. He didn't get 5 minutes in before the first hand shot up. Mr. Duval. A voice called from the press section, do you care to comment on the allegations of money laundering through offshore shell companies? The room went dead silent. Marcus froze. Just for a second, but I saw it. Everyone saw it. I'm here to talk about the future of, he began, but the journalist cut him off. Sir, multiple financial records have surfaced this morning linking you directly to illegal transfers. The authorities are already investigating. Will you be stepping down? A second voice joined in. Is it true the board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon? The noise built, questions tumbling over each other until Marcus's microphone was drowned out entirely. From my seat, I watched him try to regain control, the same way I'd seen him do 100 times in smaller rooms. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was the global stage, and the sharks smelled blood. He lasted another 90 seconds before the moderator intervened, announcing the keynote was postponed. Marcus walked off stage to a barrage of flashing cameras. Marcus was halfway down, moving fast, when I called out, "How does it feel, Marcus?" He stopped like he'd hit a wall. Slowly he turned, and when his eyes found mine, the recognition was instant, followed by rage. "You," he said, voice low and venomous. "This was you." I took a measured step forward, letting my heels click against the floor. Every leak. Every investor you lost. Every board member questioning you. That was me. His nostrils flared. You think you're clever? You've just made yourself an enemy you can't afford. I smiled, slow and deliberate. You made me an enemy years ago. I just became better at the game than you. His hand shot out, gripping my wrist so hard I felt the bones press together. You're going to regret this. Before I could respond, another voice came from behind him, cool, deep and dangerous. Let her go. Marcus froze and I saw his shoulders tense before he turned. Adrian stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, posture deceptively relaxed. But his eyes were sharp as glass. You, Marcus said, realization dawning. I should have known. You should have, Adrian cut in, stepping closer. And you should also remember exactly what I told you the last time you tried to screw me over. You don't touch what's mine. Marcus's grip on my wrist loosened, but he didn't step back. Adrian's expression hardened. I said let her go. Marcus released me abruptly and I stepped back, rubbing my wrist. Not because it still hurt, but because I wanted him to see the mark his hand had left. Adrian shifted slightly, his body angling just enough to put himself between Marcus and me. You're done here, Duval. Walk away while you still can. Marcus's mouth twisted into something ugly, but before he could speak, the pounding of heavy footsteps filled the corridor. 2 SEC agents in dark suits rounded the corner, flashing badges. Marcus Duval, one of them said. You're under investigation for multiple counts of financial fraud, money laundering and conspiracy. We need you to come with us. The fury in Marcus's eyes as they cuffed him was almost enough to make me laugh. Almost. We stood there watching as they led him away. His voice echoed down the hall, low and bitter. This isn't over. I smiled faintly. It is for you. The chaos outside was still in full swing. Reporters shouting, cameras flashing. But Adrian kept his hand at the small of my back as we moved toward the private exit. You all right? He asked quietly. I am now, I said. Something flickered in his expression and for a moment the noise around us faded. There was a warmth in his eyes I hadn't seen before, one that wasn't just business. You've been a hell of a partner, he said. I smiled. So have you. Marcus's empire was dust. Ivy was surviving but barely. Me. I was exactly where I was meant to be, untouchable, unafraid, and if Adrian's lingering glances were anything to go by, not entirely alone. And then I saw Ivy. She was in a corner, surrounded by a few hangers-on who clearly hadn't read the room. She spotted me, hesitated, and then walked over. You did this, she said quietly, her expression unreadable. I took a sip of my coffee. You helped. Her lips twitched. I suppose I did. You'll be fine, I said. Just, not where you used to be. Her eyes narrowed. Meaning you'll keep your house, your clothes, maybe even a smaller circle of friends. But the days of being the queen of Bayview's charity circuit? Over. She looked like she wanted to argue, but in the end she just walked away. By evening the news was everywhere. Marcus Duval under investigation for financial crimes. Duval Logistics stock plummets 37% in a day. Board moves to remove CEO after damning revelations. Marcus's empire, the one he'd built on arrogance and shortcuts, was collapsing in real time. Fleetline Global, meanwhile, was closing 2 new contracts that same week. Adrian and I met later that night on the balcony of his penthouse, champagne in hand. I was barefoot, legs curled under me, a glass of wine in hand. Adrian was leaning back in his chair, jacket off, tie loosened. You know, he said, you could have walked away months ago. Let the market eat him alive. I could have, I agreed. But I didn't just want him gone. I wanted him to feel it. Adrian's mouth curved. You wanted him to feel what he made you feel. I met his gaze. Exactly. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was charged, deliberate. His eyes lingered on me just a moment too long before he looked away, sipping his drink. For the first time in a long time I didn't feel like I was carrying a war on my back. To the end of an era, he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his. And the beginning of a better one. The following month I stood on the deck of a Fleetline cargo vessel as it pulled out of Bayview Harbor, the city skyline stretching behind me. Marcus was out, stripped of his title, his assets frozen, his name dragged through every news cycle. Ivy had retreated into the background, clinging to what little dignity she had left. Me. I had my company, my reputation, and a seat at the table no one could take away. For the first time in years, I felt the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've settled every score. Marcus once told me the world was divided into predators and prey. He wasn't wrong. He just never realized which one I was. 3 months after Marcus Duval was let out of the Global Maritime Summit in handcuffs, the world had moved on. The markets had digested the scandal. The tabloids had wrung every last ounce of drama from it. Investors had turned their attention to the next big name to fall. But I hadn't moved on. Not in the way most people mean when they say it. Because I wasn't trying to forget. I was making sure the life I'd fought for, the one I'd bled for in every way but literal, was exactly the way I wanted it. Fleetline Global had doubled in size since the takeover. Our international expansion into Singapore and Rotterdam was ahead of schedule, and we just secured a shipping contract with one of the largest electronics manufacturers in Asia. Adrian and I still split ownership 50-50, though the industry whispered that he was the power behind Serena Holt. The truth was, we were the power behind each other. On a cool Friday morning in late spring, we were on the balcony of the Fleetline headquarters, a sleek glass tower overlooking the harbor, reviewing the last quarter's numbers. "This is insane," I said, scanning the profit columns. "I thought we'd be in the black by year 2. Not, whatever this is." Adrian leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets, looking infuriatingly calm. "You're welcome." I rolled my eyes. "You're not taking full credit for this." "I'm taking half," he said with a faint smirk. "Which is exactly what I own." We stood there in companionable silence for a while, watching the cranes load containers below. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if none of this had happened?" he asked suddenly. "You mean if Marcus hadn't betrayed me? If I just married him?" Adrian glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "I don't think about it much," I said after a moment, "because the version of me that would have stayed with him isn't someone I want to know." He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what I meant. That evening we attended a charity gala, the kind Ivy used to dominate. He was there, of course. We exchanged polite nods across the room, nothing more. She'd survived the scandal socially, but she'd never regained her old position. The people who had once clung to her now treated her like a footnote. I wasn't cruel enough to gloat in her face. But I also wasn't generous enough to pretend we were equals. Later, after the gala, Adrian offered to drive me home. Instead, we ended up at his place. He poured 2 glasses of wine and we settled onto his sofa, the city lights spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Do you miss it?" he asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "The fight." I thought about it. I missed the focus, the clarity of knowing exactly what I was working toward. But the rest. I shook my head. No. I don't miss being fueled by anger every day. It's exhausting. His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. "You've changed." "So have you," I said. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed the shift between us. The banter was still there, but there was something else now, a quiet warmth under the sharp edges. He'd stopped keeping quite so much distance. His hand would brush mine when he passed me a folder. His eyes would linger a little too long when I laughed. And I didn't mind. Not at all. On my birthday, he took me to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the bay. The weather was perfect. Warm enough to sit outside, cool enough for the candles to keep flickering without melting into puddles. He handed me a small black box. I opened it to find a silver compass pendant, delicate but unmistakably precise, the kind used in old maritime navigation. "For when you need reminding," he said quietly, "that you'll always know your way." It was the first gift in years that made my throat tighten. "Thank you," I said, meaning more than just for the necklace. We never labeled whatever was between us. We didn't need to. Some things work better when they're not forced into definitions. All I knew was that in every meeting, every late-night strategy call, every moment I looked up and found him watching me like I was the only person in the room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. Not because I couldn't fight my own battles anymore, but because I finally didn't have to fight them alone. 6 months after Marcus's arrest, I returned to the pier where I'd first realized I was in love with him. Back when I was too young to see the cracks. The water smelled the same. The gulls still wheeled overhead. But the memories had no teeth anymore. Adrian joined me, a coffee in each hand. "Still thinking about him?" he asked. "No," I said truthfully. just thinking about how far I've come. He handed me the coffee, his fingers brushing mine. You're not done yet. I smiled. No. I'm not. The world still saw me as the woman who'd taken down Marcus Duval. But I knew better. That was just the beginning. And as I stood there beside Adrian, the bay stretching out before us, I knew one thing for certain. I'd never be prey again. The end.